now we will be studying about the second process of the pre-fertilization event, which is gamete transfer. We have completed with the first, that was gametogenesis. Now the next one is gamete transfer. Now as the term says, or you already know that for the process of fusion or the fertilization that we had talked about earlier needs physical contact. So there should always be physical contact between male and female gamete for the process of fusion. So now there are different organisms which have evolved or developed different mechanisms by which these male as well as female gametes will come close, or the fusion can take place, or they can come in physical contact. Now, generally for this thing to happen, the male gamete are motile and the female gamete, we have already discussed this earlier, that in most of the organisms the male gamete are motile, whereas the female gamete is non-motile. Only with exceptions in organisms, like you will find exception in organisms like algae and fungi, where the male and female gamete both will be motile. Now what is the reason? We had already discussed it yesterday, the types of gamete, homogametes, right? So since they are morphologically similar, you cannot distinguish whether it will be a male gamete or a female gamete, and both these gametes will be motile. Okay. Now for the male gamete, as I said, it is motile, and the female gamete non-motile. These kind of conditions is generally found in organisms like bryophytes, pteridophytes, etc. Or basically you can say that it is found in bryophytes and pteridophytes, where the male gamete is motile and the female gamete is non-motile. Again, since I have written bryophytes and pteridophytes, that does not mean that gymnosperms and angiosperms will not have a motile male gamete. But these plants, like gymnosperms and angiosperms, they contain a special structure within them which is called as the seed. So these plants will be called as the seed plants. Gymnosperms and angiosperms, they will be called as the seed plants. Now, in case of seed plants, again, there are special structures which are responsible for carrying the gamete. Like, pollen grain is a structure which carries the male gamete. Remember, pollen grain is itself not a gamete, but it carries the male gamete. And there is a structure called as ovule present in the female flowers, or the female reproductive part, which carries the egg called as the female gamete. Again, egg is the gamete and not ovule. In case of seeded plants, for the process of pollen grain, the structure which carries the male gamete, to reach up to the stigma of the female reproductive part, there is a special process taking place called as pollination. Right? So the process by which the pollen grains are transferred from the male flower or the male reproductive part up to the stigma of the female reproductive part can be called as pollination. Again, these pollination can be done by different ways, which we will be studying in the next chapters. But for the time being, you need to remember that pollination is a process in which the pollen grains which carry the male gamete are transferred up to the stigma, which is one of the part of the female reproductive system. Okay. Now again, earlier to this, we have studied about sexuality. We did study that there are certain plants which have both male and female reproductive organs, which will be called as bisexual. Whereas certain plants or flowers are unisexual, that means the male flower is separate and the female flower is separate. If the plants are bisexual, that is male and female reproductive organs both are present within the same flower, then the type of pollination that will be taking place is called as self-pollination. That means within the same flower there will be present the female reproductive part and the male reproductive part. The pollen grains from the anther or the male reproductive part will land on the stigma of the same flower. So this process is called as what? Self-pollination. Whereas if the flowers are unisexual, that means the male and female flowers will be separate, then that process is called as cross-pollination. What is going to happen in that case? The male flower is separate and the female flower is separate. So, this is a male flower with the male reproductive parts and this is a female flower. So, the pollen will have to land from these flower to the other flower. So that process is called as what? Cross-pollination. Now when you consider these pollination taking place in seeded plants, there are series of events which will take place, which will ultimately lead to the process of fertilization. Let us just have a look in a flowchart manner that what is going to happen. Because of pollination, the pollen lands on stigma, right? After the pollen lands on the stigma there will be a process taking place called as germination. So there will be germination of pollen grain taking place. As germination takes place, basically it results in the formation of a structure called as pollen tube. Now this pollen tube is carrying the male gamete. So the function of these pollen tube is to carry the male gamete that was present in the pollen up to the egg or the female gamete. And when there will be physical contact between the two, female gamete, it will result into the process of fusion or fertilization. Okay, so pollination, the way by which the pollen will be transferred. As soon as it is transferred, it will germinate, resulting into the formation of pollen tube, and this pollen tube is carrying the male gamete. And the gamete, as soon as it reaches the female gamete, there will be physical contact which results into the fusion of the male and female gamete. Now this is all what we have talked about plants. What about animals? Now in case of animals, there are special mechanisms through which, or special physical contact mechanisms by which the male and female gametes will come in contact, which we will be studying in the next chapters.